Welcome to the Chronicles of a Cheating Wife channel. A new story every day. Don't forget to subscribe. I froze in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall in delicate, too easy breaths. She lay there on the bed, leaning on one elbow, phone in hand. The overhead lamp was off. Only a single dim bedside light shaped her silhouette against the drapes. She looked so peaceful, so unaware. It struck me like a minor revelation. Her entire demeanor, soft, unguarded, had drifted away from me long before I'd noticed it was gone. She turned her head and saw me. Her eyes widened. "God, you scared me," she said. "How long have you been standing there?" I didn't answer. I let the question bounce off me and fade. I wasn't angry. I'd moved beyond anger. I stepped into the room, letting the door close behind me. And she kept looking at me, waiting for some sort of reaction. I just watched the way her hair fell across her cheek, the subtle shift in her posture as she propped herself up straighter. An old habit of hers, chest forward, shoulders back, a quick flash of that defensive tension. She always tried to present a calm front, and I, by then, had grown skilled at noticing the little cracks. I'd spent most of our marriage cataloging the nuances of her moods, her subtle tells. Now I felt like an observer in a glass box, dispassionately noting her every movement. She scooted up on the bed, adjusting the collar of her nightgown. "Are you all right?" "Fine," I said. The word came out too flat, too clipped. "We should talk." She pressed her lips together in a tight line and glanced down at her phone. Like a reflex, she couldn't resist. Some internal check. I'd seen that look too many times to count. It was the same way she'd turn her gaze away when I tried to meet her eyes, the way she started speaking quickly whenever something on TV reminded her of infidelity, the way she'd shift the subject with the effortless grace of someone who'd had a lot of practice. I moved to the far side of the bed and sat down. The mattress dipped under my weight. I remember the ambient hush of the house. The old floorboards made little crackling noises, as though the place were actively listening. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. She exhaled quietly, bracing herself. I said, "How's your day?" as if it were the most ordinary question in the world. She blinked. "My day." Her voice sharpened with confusion, or maybe fear. "It was fine." "Why?" I turned my head to look at her. "You sure there's nothing you want to tell me?" Her lips parted, and I saw the faint flicker of panic behind her eyes. The ghost of an anxious flinch. "What is this about, Mark?" "That's my name. Mark." And in that moment, it sounded foreign on her tongue, as if we'd become two strangers trying out each other's names for the first time. But I kept my voice steady. "Just wondering," I said. "Two toothbrushes in the shower." "I only use one." Her entire body stiffened. The tension in her jaw was painful to watch. "Oh," she whispered, "that's just an old one. I might have used it once." "Twice, maybe 3 times," I said. Then I nodded toward the trash can in the corner of our bathroom, which was visible through the open door. The empty wine bottles. We haven't gone through that many together. And Netflix. You made a new user profile. Teddy. She shot up straighter. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said softly. "But you can keep talking. I'd like to hear how you'll spin it." She swallowed, tried to speak, but the words stumbled in her throat. I watched her carefully, half expecting a frantic denial, but she stayed quiet. The only sound was her breathing, that same too light rhythm. Maybe I should have felt sorry for her. Maybe I should have shouted. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the thick rug under my feet. All I could see was the swirl of its pattern, the color of it in the dim lamp glow. The shape reminded me of water stains on old wallpaper, impossible to ignore once you notice them. She said, "It's not serious." Those words were thinner than air, and still I barely recognized her voice. Then her eyes darted around the room, searching for refuge. She found none. Eventually, she forced her gaze back to me. "Mark, I never meant for it to." "Stop." I took a slow breath. I can't do this. Not here. I got up from the bed and walked to the closet, pressing my hand against the doorframe. Let's not dig into every detail right now, all right? I want to do something else. I want us to go away together for a few days. You and me. The lake house. Remember the one we rented? 20 years ago. Her face froze. I could practically see her running the math. This was supposed to be a trap, or a chance at reconciliation, or some weird gesture from me. She had no clue which, and I found no reason to clarify. Yeah, she said. Of course I remember. We'll go there, I told her. My voice echoed in my head, a monotone loop. We'll talk it out. No pressure, no alarm bells. If you want to fix us, we'll do it there. She looked uneasy. All right. I nodded. Saturday. Pack a bag. She stared at me, probably trying to glean some small sign of hope or fury. But I gave her nothing. My chest felt hollowed out. I was numb. And numbness was the single advantage I had. Maybe if I'd raged, if I'd stormed out, she would have kept me at arm's length. But I was done with open anger. All that existed was the surgical clarity of a man who discovered the final piece of evidence. Unforgivable, but also predictable. I left the room. Behind me, she started to call my name again. I didn't stop. I walked down the hallway, silent, heavy steps, and closed the study door behind me. That night, I drifted in and out of sleepless dreams on the leather couch. Every time I jolted awake, I saw the bookshelf spines looming in the dark. My old architecture textbooks, some scattered design portfolios, familiar shapes, indifferent. I breathed in, then out, feeling my pulse slow. Once upon a time, those nights had been spent working too late. Now it was the only corner of the house where I felt I could draw a full breath. In the morning, she was unnervingly bright and composed. She was always good at that, patching up cracks, making a home look flawless despite the rot in the walls. I answered her good morning greeting with a curt nod. She busied herself in the kitchen, making coffee, cleaning the counters, fiddling with the laundry, anything to avoid the rawness between us. My daughter, blissfully unaware, popped into the kitchen to rummage for breakfast. I felt a pang in my chest when she told me about her plans with friends and how she'd be home late. She gave me the usual wave and half smile, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl on her way out. The idea that soon her entire world would tilt, that she'd see her mother for who she was, sat like a stone in my gut. I said nothing. I let it sit. That day, I went to work, pretending my daily routine was intact. My coworkers noticed I was quiet, but most of them shrugged it off. Architecture requires concentration, or maybe they were too wrapped up in their own deadlines to care. At lunch, I stood in front of the window, looking down at the city. My reflection stared back, a man with thinning hair at the temples, a faint slump in the shoulders, but eyes that refused to show weakness. I found it interesting that my mind immediately jumped to the lake house, the memory of it from 2 decades ago. We'd been younger then, full of illusions about life, about each other. Her laughter had been so genuine then. She used to look at me as if I were her entire world. And I had let myself believe that look was permanent. Over the next few days, I methodically prepared for our little trip. I told her nothing of the details. I simply reminded her that we'd leave early Saturday morning, so we could make the 5-hour drive in daylight. She nodded, forced a little smile. Maybe she thought it was an olive branch. Maybe she was telling Teddy, her Teddy, she'd have no phone service for a while. I didn't ask. The day before we left, I discreetly called the caretaker of the lake property to confirm it was vacant and to let me in. I arranged everything. It was an older cabin, owned by an acquaintance of mine from work, still in decent shape. They rarely used it, but I recalled how she and I had spent a weekend there in our 30s. The memory was a dusty photograph in my head, yet it came back with vivid colors now that I needed it. Saturday morning, I loaded the trunk while she lingered in the doorway. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, face lightly made up, hair brushed neatly. She caught my eye, offered a tentative smile. I returned a small nod and climbed into the driver's seat. She shut the passenger door behind her, settled in. The engine rumbled, and we left in silence. Hours passed. The road wound through forested stretches, then along highways slicing past farmland and small towns. She started to talk once or twice, small talk, commentary on the scenery, but my monosyllabic answers shut it down. I felt her tension intensify. Maybe she was steeling herself for a confrontation. Maybe she was waiting for me to break. But I was done breaking. When we arrived, the trees towered around the cabin, just as they had before. The lake glinted through the pines, a silver mirror in the late afternoon sun. I got out, inhaled the crisp air, and led her inside. The caretaker had left the key under a stone by the porch steps. The interior smelled of musty wood and old furnishings, but it was serviceable. A single large bedroom, small kitchen, modest living area with a stone fireplace. Immediately, a wave of memory tugged at me. She'd worn a black sundress back then, much like the black dress I'd insisted she bring along for this weekend. I'd told her to wear it if we went out to dinner. She had given me a puzzled look, but had packed it anyway. I told her, "I'm going to get some groceries. You unpack." She nodded. "Okay." I took the car and drove a few miles down to a local store, parked under the old cedar, stared for a moment at my phone. Then I opened my messages. There was a recent text from her phone to an unknown number. Short and cryptic. Something about, "I'll let you know. Maybe tonight." I stared at it, felt the coldness bloom in my chest. She was planning to invite him here. That was my guess. She probably thought I was trying to mend our relationship, and in her mind, maybe she was ready to stage some elaborate lie if she got cornered. Or maybe she thought I'd be gone long enough for something else to happen. But how far was she willing to go? I tapped the wheel, considering. Then I let out a low exhale, started the car, and drove back to the cabin. On the way, I made sure to leave the door unlocked. We spent that afternoon in near silence. I fiddled with the camera equipment I'd brought. Just for old memories, I told her when she asked. She accepted that explanation with a careful look. Dinner was quiet, just some basic food I'd picked up at the store. The sun slipped lower behind the trees, and I suggested she put on that black dress. I said I wanted to see her in it, see if it still had the same effect it used to have on me. She hesitated, wary, uncertain, but then she disappeared into the bedroom. I waited, forcing my breathing to remain steady. A twig snapped under my shoe. I realized I was pacing by the back door, so I forced myself to stand still. When she emerged, I felt a surge of old memories. The black fabric clung to her frame. It was tasteful, elegant, and it made me think of the time we danced in the moonlight by this very lake, 100 years ago. Only now, I knew she wore it for another man. There was no bright glimmer in her eyes for me, just tension, maybe guilt. But I had asked her to do it, so she obliged. I said, "You look good," in a voice so neutral that it sounded almost robotic. Her eyes darted away. She bit her lip, but said nothing. Then I pretended I'd forgotten an item from the store. I told her I'd be back, that she should make herself comfortable, and I walked out. The front door was left unlocked. I circled around the cabin, quietly, stepping over the pine needles so they barely crunched under my weight. Once inside, I didn't go back to her. I slipped into the bedroom, turned off the lights, and tucked myself into the darkest corner near the closet. The plan was simple. Wait, see how far she was willing to let this intrusion go. A part of me might have been prepared for nothing to happen, for her to stay alone in the living room. But I already had an idea. She told him, maybe tonight. And the door was unlocked. Minutes trickled by. The hush of the evening settled in, the cheer of crickets, the occasional distant splash from the lake. Then I heard the front door open, footsteps crossing the threshold. My heart hammered. Another set of footsteps. Hers. She said his name, softly. Teddy. A surge of raw nausea burned my throat, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. They were speaking in low voices. I couldn't make out every word, just enough to know she told him the place was empty, that I was gone until late. She gave a hushed laugh, the same laugh she used to give me. I closed my eyes, letting that old betrayal tear through me all over again. But I kept my position. I was supposed to be calm. The man who already knew everything. The tension in my jaw felt like steel rods. He took off his shoes. I heard them thud gently against the wall. That casual sense of ownership, like this was his home. Then I heard them move, the soft shuffle of feet, the hush of their voices. They were right outside the bedroom door. She said, "We have time," but her voice held a nervous edge. Then a slight giggle, and the door creaked open. They entered. My entire body was rigid. My eyes had adjusted to the dark, so I saw the silhouette of him first, compact, about my height, but narrower build. She was leaning into him, one hand on his shoulder. Her black dress was the only thing that stood out, a dark shape in an even darker space, but I saw her face upturned to his. He brushed her hair aside and kissed her. I clenched my teeth, feeling a spike of rage swirl inside, but I forced it down. She let out a soft sound, something that should have belonged to me a lifetime ago. Their kiss lingered. He whispered something about how good she smelled, how he missed her. She mumbled that she'd missed him too. She was breathing faster. I saw her hand slide up around his neck. My mind flickered through memories of holding her that same way. And as I watched, a terrifying calm descended on me, as though I were studying a pair of unsuspecting subjects through a lens. In a way I was. They'd moved to the bed, piece by piece. She turned a small bedside lamp on, but the glow was still faint. She set it to its lowest setting. For a moment, my vantage point gave me every detail, the way her cheeks were flushed, the way his hands traveled over her waist, how her dress slid up slightly at the hem, the hush of her breath as he kissed down the side of her neck. She arched softly, letting him guide her. Her eyes half closed. He murmured, "I love it when you wear black." She let out a small laugh. "He likes black on me too." Teddy paused. "Your husband. Don't talk about him now," he whispered, but with a smirk in his voice. "This night is ours." My hand tightened into a fist. For a moment, a wild urge hammered in my chest. Confront them now. But I held back. I needed them to cross the line so completely that there would be no denial, no half-lies. I let them continue. The air grew thick with the sounds of their closeness. I glimpsed the angle of his hand on her thigh, the tilt of her face as she closed her eyes. My stomach tightened. She moaned softly, too intimate a sound. A surge of old heartbreak warred with the cold fury that had become my baseline. I breathed through my nose, forcing my composure. Eventually, he started tugging her dress straps aside, pressing himself against her. She seemed to forget everything in those moments. Me, her marriage, the daughter we'd raised. Her fingers combed through his short hair, and she whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear the words, but it hardly mattered. The tone said it all. The bed creaked gently under them. I turned on the light. A harsh white flash. They both froze, blinking at the sudden glare. Her breath caught in her throat, and she scrambled upright. He jerked around, eyes wild. I stepped out of the shadows, camera in hand. I was filming them. It took them a half-second to register what was happening. She gasped, "Mark." She reached for the blanket to cover herself, panic etched across her face. Teddy looked simultaneously confused and furious, like an animal cornered by an unexpected threat. He half stood up, fists clenching, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I told him, quietly. "Don't move." She stared at me, disbelief warring with shame. Her eyes flicked to the camera. The little red light glowed. "Mark," she choked, her voice unraveling. "What are you doing?" I said nothing. I kept the lens on them for a moment longer, letting the hush scrape over us like a razor. Then I set the camera down on a nearby dresser and pressed a button to stop the recording. I looked at her, still eerily calm, and turned to him. His jaw flexed. I noticed the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was breathing almost as hard as she was. "It's not," she started, but her voice cracked. "You have to understand, Mark, it's—" I lifted my hand, a small gesture that silenced her. I walked around to the foot of the bed, saw the sheets bunched where they'd pressed their bodies together. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, combined with his cologne. I recognized that cologne from the times I'd smelled something foreign in our bathroom. Another detail that I had once tried to rationalize. Teddy stepped back, grabbed his shoes with trembling fingers, but didn't yet make for the door. He was too stunned. I locked eyes with him. "This is over," I said. "Now." He stared, uncertain, then began to stammer. "Look, man, I cut him off. I didn't ask for your commentary. You came here like you owned the place, right? You took off your shoes as if it was your home. Did you enjoy wearing my life for a moment?" He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I watched him war with the urge to punch me, or to flee. She started crying, tears welling in her eyes as she clutched the blanket to her chest. I stared at her, seeing for the first time not the woman I married, but a stranger, someone who had systematically replaced my wife in the last few months or years without me fully realizing. "Teddy, get out," she whispered, almost hysterical now. She pivoted from being intimate with him to discarding him in seconds. "Get out, please." He blinked, as if betrayed by her sudden turn, but he had no reason to stay. Whatever illusions he had about this arrangement, about her, about me, those illusions were shattered, scattered like glass. He shuffled into his shoes, shooting me a final glare, maybe wanting to say something. I returned his stare with an emptiness that must have unnerved him. Finally, he jerked open the bedroom door, hurried out. The front door slammed behind him. I heard his footsteps fade outside. She sobbed once. Her mascara was smeared, hair tangled. The black dress bunched awkwardly around her waist. After a moment, she stifled her tears and looked at me with a mixture of desperation and fury. "Why?" she said. "Why did you do this?" I almost laughed at the question. "Why?" I repeated. "Because you left me no choice. Because you lied. Because you needed to be reminded of consequences. That's why." She looked at me as if I were the monster here, as though filming her was the greatest betrayal. "I was lost," she said, voice shaking. "I was lonely, and you were always so distant." My gaze flicked to the camera. I picked it up, still cool, methodical. She reached out, as though to grab my arm, but I took a step back. "I don't want your excuses," I told her. "I just want the truth." "I never meant to hurt you," she whimpered. The laugh that slipped out of my mouth was hollow, mirthless. "Really? Because you were good at it." She bowed her head, silent tears streaking her cheeks. I watched her for a moment, letting my own bitterness swirl. Then I took a breath, that cold clarity surging again. I said, "I'm taking this home. We'll discuss it there, where our daughter can see it, where everyone can see who you are." Her eyes snapped up, and raw horror showed on her face. "No," she gasped. "Please, not that." "Mark, I beg you." I closed my eyes, exhaling. Too late. The hush stretched, thick and suffocating. She started sobbing in earnest. She reached for me, but I turned away. The smell of heartbreak and betrayal was so strong that I could almost taste it. I left the bedroom, hearing her cry out my name, but it was distant, as if there was a wall between us. In my mind, that wall had existed for a very long time. I walked outside, inhaled the cold evening air. The lake was calm, moonlight flickering off its surface. My hands were shaking. Inside me, a swirl of contradictory emotions raged: love, pity, disgust, heartbreak, guilt at how methodical I'd become. I pressed my back against the cabin's outer wall and closed my eyes. The only question that remained was how deeply this final act would cost me, because I knew that revenge is never simple. It punishes the betrayer, yes, but it also punishes the one who enacts it. I forced myself to breathe. Behind me, she was crying, alone in the bedroom. The old cabin witnessed it all, just as it had once witnessed our younger, happier selves. But those people were gone. And the film I'd just taken would become the final proof of that. My plan was to make sure the family saw it. Her parents, maybe my own, certainly our daughter. She would see, beyond all illusions, who her mother really was. That was the devastation I'd sworn to unleash. We left the next morning. The drive back was brutal in its silence. At one point, I pulled over to let her use the restroom, and she asked me in a tremulous voice, "Are you really going to do this?" When I didn't reply, she burst into tears again. I waited until she was done, then started the car without a word. Back in our house, I set about transferring the footage. She hovered near me, eyes red, hands trembling. She pleaded with me to spare her, to at least keep this from our daughter. "I'll leave. I'll move out if you want. Just don't do this to her." I stared at my computer screen, watching the first few frames of the video. I saw them entwined, her dress halfway off her shoulder, his mouth on her neck. I felt a visceral twist in my guts, but outwardly, I was carved from stone. She tried to touch my arm, but I shrugged her off. "I told you," I said, "we're going to show it to everyone." She sank to her knees, tears dripping off her chin. "Please." I turned away, my arms crossed. For the briefest instant, I hesitated. The father in me, the one who wanted to protect my daughter from the shrapnel of this marriage, stirred. But the man in me who'd been replaced, who'd lost all sense of belonging, roared for final retribution. She had to answer for her betrayal. If that meant our daughter would never look at her mother the same way again, well, that was on her. So I let the footage finish transferring. Then, as a test, I played it on the living room television. She watched in silent horror while I stood with the remote in hand. The house was quiet aside from the muffled audio of her gasps and moans. I couldn't bear to watch more than a few seconds of it, so I paused. That small snippet was enough to ensure there would be no more illusions. Our daughter arrived home not long after. She saw our stiff postures, the signs of tears on her mother's face. She asked, confused, "What's going on?" Her eyes darted between us. My wife started to speak, but couldn't form the words. I took a step toward the television, remote in hand. A faint trembling overcame me. This was the moment, the line in the sand. She pleaded with me silently, shaking her head, tears glistening in her eyes. The father in me flinched at the thought. Our daughter was a teenager, not a little child. But this was more explicit than any heartbreak talk. I felt something inside me rip wide open. But I couldn't stop. This had to be done, no matter how ugly. I pressed play. My wife let out a strangled cry, stumbling forward. But the video started rolling, flickering onto the screen. I only let it run for a few seconds, just enough to see her black dress riding up. The man's face turned into her neck. Our daughter's gasp sliced through the air. She covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide with a kind of raw shock that jolted me to my core. Then I stopped it, turned off the TV. Silence crashed down. For a moment, our daughter stared, uncomprehending, tears gathering in her eyes. My wife stood hunched, arms wrapped around herself. And I felt a hollow victory, if you could call it that. My entire body trembled. Mom. My daughter managed, her voice shaking, a raw quiver. What was that? My wife opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Eventually she whispered, "It's my fault. It's all my fault." She tried to move toward our daughter, but the girl recoiled, eyes brimming with stunned hurt. "You?" she choked, voice thick with tears, "with some other guy." My wife fell to her knees, sobbing. The living room lights cast harsh shadows over everything, making the scene feel stark, hyper-real. A father, a mother, a child, shattered by a single unhinged moment of betrayal. And me, the executioner, standing with the remote still gripped in my hand. My daughter looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she whispered, "why did you show me that?" I couldn't speak. I searched for words, some explanation that would validate my cruelty. But everything lodged in my throat. I found no absolution for what I'd done. I'd wanted vengeance, and I'd just used her heartbreak as a weapon. The father in me wanted to hold her, to promise that everything would be okay. But that felt like a lie. I wasn't sure if anything would be okay again. She let out a choked, broken sob and ran upstairs. I heard her bedroom door slam. My wife was hunched on the floor, face buried in her hands. The only thing I felt was a dull ache in my chest, as though I'd just carved out a vital organ and tossed it away. This was my revenge, showing them both the raw face of her infidelity. But it was also my punishment, because now there would be no normalcy left, no illusions, no intact family. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen, mascara tracks down her cheeks. "You've destroyed me," she said, voice ragged. I stared back, forcing my lips to form the words that I clung to as justification. "You destroyed yourself," I said. I just let the truth show. Her whole body shook with sobs. She pressed her forehead to the floor. For a split second, regret flared in my chest. But I squashed it down. I was finished being the man who let her walk all over me. This was a closure of sorts, a door slamming shut on what used to be us. I stepped back, letting her have the living room floor, letting her cry. No more illusions. I tucked the remote on the mantel, a symbolic gesture, or maybe just me being too spent to do anything else. Then, with numb footsteps, I climbed the stairs, heading toward my daughter's room. She wouldn't let me in. Through the closed door, I could hear her sobbing. "Go away," she cried. I leaned my forehead against the wood, feeling the sting of tears behind my own eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry." She said nothing back, just sobbed. I pressed my palm flat to the door, wishing I could take it all back. But I also knew that if I took it back, her mother would keep living a lie. And so I stood there, silent, letting her cry, letting the final shards of my anger echo in my skull. Eventually, I returned downstairs. My wife was no longer in the living room. I found her in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to compose herself. She looked up when I entered. We stared at each other in a suffocating silence. "What now?" she asked, voice raw. I shrugged, feeling empty. "You can stay," I said, "or leave. That's up to you." She blinked through tears. "Don't you want me gone?" "I want to see what you do," I said, my voice drained of emotion. "Will you run to him, or will you face what you've done here? That's your call." She pressed her hands over her face. "I have nowhere else to go." My jaw clenched. Not my problem. Her shoulders shook, her face twisted with heartbreak. But I couldn't muster empathy. I turned away, letting her stand there alone, letting the quiet tension fill the corners of the house. Part of me expected her to pack up and leave that same night, but she didn't. I suppose she was too shocked, maybe too aware of the condemnation that lay outside our front door. Days passed. Our daughter refused to speak to either of us, except for the barest acknowledgments. Yes, no, please pass the salt. She was furious with me, with her mother, with the entire situation. I tried to explain once that I was sorry for exposing her to it all. She just stared at me with eyes that looked older than they should, then walked away. I'd done this. I'd chosen vengeance over caution. I tried to persuade myself I'd had no other choice. But in the quiet hours, guilt seeped in, mixing with bitterness. That was my real punishment. No matter how many times I told myself it was justified. I knew my daughter was wounded in the crossfire. My wife, Julia, kept to herself most days, taking long walks around the neighborhood, coming home with blotchy cheeks from crying. Once or twice, I saw her texting on her phone. Probably Teddy. Maybe she was telling him how her life was ruined now, that her husband was a monster. Or maybe they were done. Maybe he had decided she was too much trouble. I never asked. She avoided me. And I gave her no reason to speak unless it was strictly necessary. People noticed. Our neighbors, our friends. They started asking why we both looked so drained, why the air between us felt like a war zone. The news began to leak, as these things do. Someone saw Teddy leaving the house, or recognized him picking her up somewhere. The rumors churned. A friend of mine from work cornered me, asked if everything was all right. I just gave him the same cold stare I'd mastered and shook my head. That was all he needed to hear. At home, I spent hours in my study, reviewing architectural plans, trying to bury myself in meticulous details. But I kept hearing that memory. The sound of her breath as Teddy's hands touched her. The laughter that belonged to me once. Now the entire house reeked of ghostly reminders. She avoided the living room, probably haunted by the memory of that humiliating video. I let the image of her face, tear-stained and desperate, replay in my head until I felt nauseated. Some nights, I thought of burning that memory stick or smashing the camera, just to exorcise the demon. But I never did. A few weeks later, she finally initiated a conversation. I was in the kitchen, fixing a sandwich for dinner, when she walked in. She was tense, hands clasped at her waist. She said, "Mark, can we talk?" I noticed she wore no makeup, her hair pinned back in a simple ponytail. The weight of her guilt hung on her shoulders like a physical burden. I set down the bread knife, wiped my hands on a dish towel, then nodded once. She swallowed hard. I found an apartment. Not too far, but far enough. It's small. I'm leaving next week. She spoke quietly, each word forced out as though reluctant. I took that in. You're sure? She nodded, eyes brimming. There's no place for me here anymore. I didn't argue. I could hear the faint sounds of our daughter moving around upstairs, probably eavesdropping. I thought about how everything had unraveled so quickly. But then maybe it wasn't quick at all. Maybe it had been unraveling for years, and I just refused to see it. You realize this changes everything with her, I said. She might forgive you someday, but she'll never see you the same way. Julia nodded miserably. I know. She twisted her ring on her finger. I wish I could fix it. I inhaled, feeling a swirl of sorrow. I used to wish that, too, I murmured. But it's too late now. She stared at the floor. I'm sorry. For all of it. I didn't respond. My chest felt hollow, a trace of residual anger flickering. She took a shaky breath. When I leave, I'll talk to our daughter. Alone. Try to explain. I don't know if it'll help, but I have to try. I nodded curtly. That's between you and her. She stepped back, tears sliding down her cheeks. I just wanted you to know. We stood there for a few seconds, the hush resonating. Then she turned and walked out. The next week slipped by in subdued agony. I took a few nights to stay in a hotel, giving myself the mental distance I needed. By the time I returned, half her belongings were gone. Our daughter lurked in her room, not wanting to engage. Finally, one afternoon, I came home from work to see the last of Julia's suitcases by the front door. She was waiting in the living room, head bowed. She glanced up when I entered. The look we exchanged was complicated. Rage, regret, sadness, a flicker of old affection. But we both knew it was done. She said, "She's upstairs." I talked to her. Her voice was hoarse. I told her I was sorry, told her this was my mistake, not yours. If she hates me, I can't blame her. I walked past her, resting a hand on the suitcase handle. All right. She reached out hesitantly, touching my shoulder. I froze, letting her hand rest there for a moment. Then I pulled away, not harshly, but firmly. "Goodbye," I said. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but words failed. She picked up her suitcase, tears on her lashes, and left without another sound. The door closed softly behind her. I stood in the stillness, listening to the echo of that door, an ending so quiet it barely seemed real. That evening, I found my daughter in her room. She was curled up on the bed, staring at a photograph of the three of us from happier times. The tears were dried on her cheeks, but her eyes looked hollow. "She's gone," I said. She nodded. "I know." I perched on the edge of her bed, a cautious distance away. "I'm sorry," I said at last. "I never wanted you in the middle of this." Her voice was small. "Then why? Why show me that video?" I closed my eyes, regret washing over me. "Because I was angry," I said, struggling to maintain the calm facade. "I wanted her to pay. And I knew that would hurt her the most, if you saw it. I'm not proud of it. But that's what I did. And I can't take it back." She sniffed, tears forming again. "Dad, I hate that it happened. And I hate that you used me to hurt her. Now I don't know how to deal with any of this." I reached for her hand, gently. "You don't have to figure it out alone," I said. "I'm still here." She pulled her hand away, not unkindly, just too overwhelmed. "Maybe I need space, too," she whispered. "I can't look at either of you the same." My mouth felt dry. "I understand." She exhaled, leaning her head back against the pillow. I wish it never happened." "So do I said quietly. We sat there in silence. The sound of the clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the air conditioner. Eventually, I got up and left her room, letting her have the solitude she needed. In my own bedroom, I lay down on the bed alone. The house felt huge now, echoing with emptiness. I stared at the ceiling. Thoughts churned in my mind, the memory of the lake cabin, the cold satisfaction I'd felt flipping on that light, the unstoppable devastation that followed. I wondered if it was worth it, if vengeance really filled the void. And I had no answer. In the following weeks, I tried to rebuild a semblance of routine. I went to work, supervised projects, nodded through business meetings. People asked about my wife. I gave them half-truths or changed the topic. My daughter spent more time out with friends, staying away from the tension at home. At night, I sometimes woke in a cold sweat, recalling the moment I saw Teddy's hands on her body. That image was lodged in my psyche, reminding me of my own humiliating replacement. The bitterness lingered, but also a sense of emptiness I couldn't shake. One day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The words, "I'm sorry for everything. I'm leaving the city." It didn't take me long to guess who it was. Teddy, perhaps. I didn't respond. I stared at the text for a moment, set the phone aside, and let out a slow exhale. He was gone, or so he claimed, and that should have given me some closure. But I found none. Weeks turned to months. Julia occasionally emailed about logistics, financial matters, the house, the possibility of divorce. She asked if we could meet to discuss legal separation. I responded curtly, agreeing to see a lawyer, dividing assets, that sort of thing. A mechanical exchange. My daughter still spoke to me, but carefully, as though I were fragile. She missed her mother in a way she couldn't articulate, and she resented me in a way that words couldn't fix. The bitterness clung to our everyday interactions, a quiet subtext we never acknowledged out loud. Sometimes at night, I remembered how it felt to flick on that camera light and see their faces. I recalled how she'd laughed with him, whispered endearments, and I realized that my revenge had indeed destroyed that relationship, but it also hollowed out a piece of me. I got what I wanted. The truth exposed, the mask ripped away. And yet, in achieving that, I'd lost the chance at any illusions of a graceful parting or a gradual, less explosive dissolution. I'd chosen the nuclear option, and nuclear options always leave a wasteland. Still, part of me believed it had to be that way. Maybe if I had confronted her gently or asked for honesty, she would have lied. Maybe if I tried counseling, she would have kept seeing him in the shadows. Maybe it was better to surgically remove the entire tumor, no matter how much blood was spilled. That was the metaphor I clung to, like a surgeon with no anesthesia. It was cruel, but thorough. I tried to keep up appearances with friends. Some of them drifted away. Others tried to remain neutral, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes, the half-formed questions they wanted to ask. Why did your wife really leave? Was there someone else? Some even had the nerve to say, "You two always seemed so happy." I let them think what they wanted, said as little as possible. The last vestiges of care in me were used up by trying to keep my daughter afloat. One evening, after a grueling day at work, I returned home to find a note on the kitchen counter. It was in my daughter's handwriting. "I'm staying at Mom's for a while. I need space." My gut clenched. She'd apparently gotten her mother's new address, and for however precarious it might be, decided that was where she needed to be. I couldn't stop her. Part of me worried she'd resent me more if I tried. Still, it hit me like a punch. The house was emptier than ever. Even the usual hum of the refrigerator felt accusatory. I tried calling her, but it went to voicemail. I texted her, telling her to be safe, that I'd always be here if she needed anything. No immediate reply came. So I ate a cold dinner alone and realized that everything I'd built, my marriage, my family, my stable home, was effectively disintegrating, and I had taken an active hand in that process. The days blurred, turning into a quiet routine of solitary living. I kept everything neat, organized, as though external order could quell the chaos inside. Occasionally, I'd get an email from Julia about dividing assets. Once, she wrote, "I hope someday you can forgive me." I deleted it without reply, not because I clung to hatred, but because I couldn't articulate how it felt to have your life's foundation crumble like that. If forgiveness was ever going to happen, it wasn't going to be typed in an email. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Our daughter turned 18 on shaky terms with both of us. She refused to let us host any kind of party. Instead, she spent her birthday with friends, leaving me to wander the house, tidying up random clutter that didn't exist. That night, I realized that the greatest cost of revenge was never simply losing the person who betrayed you. The greatest cost was losing the illusions you once shared, and the parts of yourself that thrived on them. One morning, I woke up to find a single text from my daughter. "Dad, let's talk soon. I'm not ready yet, but I want to try." I stared at the phone, a swirl of relief and dread. The next day, she came by the house. We sat on the porch, a mug of tea in her hands, coffee in mine. She looked older, more composed, though her eyes still carried shadows. She said, "I talked to Mom. She wants me to understand her side, but I still can't wrap my head around how she could do that to you, to us." I nodded, letting her speak. She fiddled with the rim of her mug. "And I want to. I want to understand why you showed me. I know you were angry, but did you think about what it would do to me?" Her words sliced, but I didn't flinch. "Yes, I knew," I said. "I wanted to hurt her, and I knew seeing your reaction would kill her inside. I used you. I'm sorry." She bit her lip, tears forming. "It worked," she whispered. "It hurt her, and it hurt me too." A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. I felt an ache behind my ribs. "I know," I said, voice tight. "And I can't change that." She swallowed. "I'm trying not to hate you for it, but I hate that you did it." "I understand," I said. "If I could go back—" "Don't," she said, eyes glistening. "We can't change it." I exhaled shakily. "No, we can't." For a while, we just sat there, letting the warm afternoon wrap around us. At some point, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her. A simple, fragile gesture. Maybe it was the closest we'd come to healing. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. My ex-wife, Julia, texted our daughter often, and occasionally me. Cold, polite updates. I lived alone in the house, now fully aware that my quest for vengeance had left me adrift. But at least there was no more lying in my life, no more illusions about what we were. Sometimes I'd stand by the living room TV, remembering the moment I pressed play, that final blow to everything we had. And in that memory, I'd see Julia's face, Teddy's presence, my own reflection in the black screen. None of us emerged unscathed. We all carried scars, whether visible or not. I'd confronted her cheating in the most extreme way, captured it on camera, forced her to face it in front of family. She'd lost our marriage, our daughter's respect, and maybe even her own sense of dignity. Teddy was an afterthought now, a fleeting presence that left behind debris. And I was the man who orchestrated the final act, a man who had once been replaced, but now had replaced love with cold retribution. Late at night, I stared at the emptiness of our bedroom ceiling and tried to recall the last time I'd felt truly at peace in my own skin. Memories of that lake cabin flickered through my mind. The younger version of myself, so sure she was mine forever. The older version, lurking in the dark, filming her betrayal. Bookends to a story that ended in flames. Eventually, I moved forward, bit by bit. I didn't know if I would ever fully mend my relationship with my daughter, but there was a thread of hope. She came for dinner sometimes. We talked about small things, avoided the big trauma. Maybe that's what we needed for now. Healing might be a slow process, if it happened at all. I never saw Julia in person again after she moved out. Maybe one day, I'll spot her in the grocery store or on the street, and our eyes will meet. I doubt we'll speak. There's not much left to say. The truth stands between us, a chasm we can't cross. We made choices, all of us, and this is where we ended up. Sometimes, people wonder if the calm after the storm feels good, like relief. But the truth is, it's just quiet. An empty hush. A place where you can't go back, no matter how you try. That's what it feels like. And in that space, there's only one cold realization left. I didn't leave. I stayed, so that everyone would see who she really was. And in doing so, I lost a part of myself too.